There's a specific moment when you recognize that the trust you extended was weaponized against you. When loyalty you provided wasn't reciprocated. When vulnerability you shared became ammunition someone used to undermine you. This recognition is clarifying in ways that comfortable experiences never are. Most people respond to this recognition with one of two patterns. Either they collapse into victimhood, replaying the betrayal, cataloging grievances, seeking sympathy from anyone who'll listen, or they swing to its opposite, becoming cynical, closing off completely, treating all future relationships as potential threats. Both patterns are understandable. Neither is strategically optimal. The first keeps you trapped in the experience, constantly reliving violation instead of processing its lessons. The second limits your capacity to form productive alliances by treating everyone as if they've already betrayed you. There's a third response that Niccolò Machiavelli would recognize: extraction. Not emotional extraction in the therapeutic sense, but strategic extraction. You mine the experience for operational intelligence. What did this reveal about human behavior? What patterns should you have recognized earlier? What vulnerabilities in your own approach allowed this to happen? This extraction process isn't about self-blame. It's about capability building. Every betrayal contains information about how people operate when they prioritize their interests over integrity. Every violation demonstrates gaps in your assessment systems. Every humiliation reveals assumptions you were making that reality didn't support. This information is valuable specifically because it's costly. You paid for it through direct experience. Most people pay this cost and gain nothing because they're focused on the emotional dimensions, on how unfair it was, how much it hurt, how wrong the other person was. All of which might be true, but none of which is strategically useful. The useful question isn't, why did they do this to me? It's, what does this teach me about how to operate going forward? Not to become paranoid or closed, but to become more discerning, more accurate in assessment, more careful about where you extend trust and vulnerability. Betrayal, when processed strategically, doesn't make you weaker. It makes you more calibrated. You don't stop trusting, you just get better at determining who's earned it and who hasn't. You don't stop being vulnerable, you just get more selective about where that vulnerability is placed. Type this in the comments: I extract lessons, not grievances. Every instance where someone violates trust provides data you couldn't get any other way. Loyalty untested is theoretical. People's behavior under pressure, when their interests conflict with their commitments, reveals actual character versus performed character. Most people miss this information value because they're focused on the violation itself. They're cataloging the wrong, seeking validation that it was wrong, wanting acknowledgement of how badly they were treated. This is understandable but strategically wasteful. The violation already happened. You can't unhappen it. What you can do is extract maximum information from it. And that information is, this person, under these conditions, prioritized their interests over their commitments to you. That's not a moral judgment, it's operational intelligence. This intelligence is specifically valuable because it's behavioral, rather than verbal. People can claim loyalty easily. Actually demonstrating it when it costs them something is different. When someone fails that test, you've learned something real about them that their words would never have revealed. Machiavelli operated in environments where this distinction was life or death important. The advisor who claimed loyalty but collaborated with opponents when it served him. The ally who promised support but withdrew when maintaining it became inconvenient. Words were cheap. Behavior under pressure revealed truth. Your environment operates similarly, just with lower stakes usually. People claim to be trustworthy, loyal, supportive. Some actually are. Some perform these qualities when it's easy but abandon them when it's hard. You can't distinguish between these two types through conversation. You can only distinguish through observation of behavior when it costs them something to maintain their commitments. Betrayal is the stress test that reveals this distinction. The person who violates trust hasn't just hurt you, they've shown you who they actually are versus who they claim to be. This is valuable information you should catalog and use. Most people waste this information by focusing on emotional processing. How could they do this? I trusted them. But the answer to how they could do it is because their interests conflicted with their commitments and they prioritized interests. That's the information. Store it. Use it to calibrate future assessments. This doesn't mean everyone will betray you. It means some people will under certain conditions. Learning which conditions and which people is the value extraction from violation. You're building a more accurate model of human behavior, not a cynical model where everyone's untrustworthy, but a calibrated model where you're better at predicting who maintains commitments under what circumstances. That improved calibration is the value betrayal provides if you extract it rather than just processing the emotional damage. When something breaks you down, you have opportunity to rebuild differently. Not randomly differently, strategically differently. You can identify what made you vulnerable and construct something more resilient in its place. Most people don't recognize this opportunity because they're focused on restoration. They want to return to how things were before the violation. This is understandable, but limiting. How things were before included the vulnerabilities that allowed the violation. Restoring that state means restoring those vulnerabilities. Reconstruction is different from restoration. You're not trying to return to previous state. You're building something new that incorporates lessons from what happened. This requires specific analysis. What made you vulnerable? Where were your assessment systems inadequate? What assumptions were you making that reality contradicted? These aren't comfortable questions because they might suggest you contributed to what happened. Not in the sense of deserving betrayal, nobody deserves that, but in the sense of having gaps in your systems that made it possible. Identifying those gaps isn't self-blame, it's capability building. Machiavelli understood this completely. When he was tortured and exiled, he didn't spend time dwelling on how unfair it was. He analyzed what led to that outcome and rebuilt his approach to account for those dynamics. His masterwork was written from exile, the direct product of reconstruction after violation. Your situation is probably less dramatic, but the principle holds. Violation creates opportunity to rebuild more intelligently, to develop better assessment systems, to become more selective about where you place trust, to construct boundaries that protect you while still allowing productive relationships. This reconstruction requires honesty about what made you vulnerable. Maybe you trusted too easily, extending commitment before people demonstrated they'd earned it. Maybe you ignored warning signs because you wanted to believe people were better than they showed themselves to be. Maybe you extended yourself to people who demonstrated they wouldn't reciprocate. None of this means the violation was your fault. It means there were patterns you can adjust going forward to reduce probability of recurrence. That adjustment is the reconstruction advantage. You're building something more resilient than what existed before because you're incorporating hard-won lessons. Most people miss this because they're focused on blame, either self-blame or blame of the other person. Both are emotionally satisfying but strategically limiting. The reconstruction advantage comes from moving past blame to analysis. What can I build differently that's more resilient? There's important distinction between strategic withdrawal and defensive closing. Strategic withdrawal is calibrated reduction of accessibility based on demonstrated trustworthiness. Defensive closing is blanket withdrawal from connection based on fear of repetition. The first is intelligent, the second is limiting. Strategic withdrawal means you're more selective about who gets access to you, but you're still forming connections with people who demonstrate they've earned them. Defensive closing means you're preventing any meaningful connection to avoid risk of violation. Most people swing to defensive closing after betrayal because it feels safer. If you don't extend trust, you can't be betrayed. If you don't allow vulnerability, you can't be hurt. This seems logical until you recognize what it costs you. Productive relationships require some vulnerability. Professional alliances require some trust. Meaningful connections require some openness. If you eliminate all of these to avoid betrayal, you've also eliminated capacity to form productive relationships. You've protected yourself from violation by making yourself isolated. Machiavelli didn't advocate isolation. He advocated discernment. Know who you're dealing with. Assess accurately. Extend trust proportional to demonstrated trustworthiness. But don't stop extending it entirely. That would limit your capacity to form productive alliances. Strategic withdrawal means you become more selective, not completely closed. You develop better assessment systems, so you're extending trust to people who've actually earned it rather than to everyone equally. You're vulnerable with people who've demonstrated they'll handle that vulnerability appropriately, not with everyone indiscriminately. This requires calibration. You can't use simple rules like never trust anyone or everyone gets one chance. You need nuanced assessment based on observation of behavior, particularly behavior under conditions where maintaining commitments costs something. The person who maintains commitments when it's convenient hasn't proven much. The person who maintains them when it's costly has demonstrated something real. Strategic withdrawal means you're noting these distinctions and allocating trust accordingly. This is harder than defensive closing because it requires ongoing assessment rather than blanket policy. But it's also more effective because it allows productive relationships while providing better protection against exploitation. You're not trying to avoid all risk. That would require complete isolation. You're trying to take calculated risks with people who've demonstrated trustworthiness rather than indiscriminate risks with anyone who seems friendly. Violation creates emotional charge that needs somewhere to go. Most people either suppress it, which creates internal pressure, or express it, which often creates additional problems. There's a third option, converting it into structured output through discipline. This isn't about distraction. It's about transformation. The emotional energy generated by betrayal is real and significant. You can let it diffuse randomly through rumination and emotional expression. Or you can channel it into deliberate effort that builds capability. Physical training works particularly well for this. The intensity required to push physical limits provides legitimate outlet for emotional charge while building actual capability. You're not avoiding processing, you're processing through exertion that simultaneously develops strength. Intellectual development works similarly. Directing energy into learning, reading, skill development converts emotional charge into capability building. You're using the activation energy from violation to fuel growth that wouldn't happen otherwise. Machiavelli did this explicitly. His period of greatest productivity came during and after torture and exile. He converted the violation and humiliation into focused intellectual output that influenced thinking for centuries. The emotional charge from his experience fueled work that wouldn't have existed without it. Your situation probably doesn't include torture and exile, but the principle applies. Violation generates emotional charge. That charge can become rumination that keeps you stuck, or it can become fuel for disciplined effort that builds capability. This requires structure. Emotional charge without direction just creates chaos. But emotional charge with disciplined structure becomes powerful energy source for development that might not happen in comfortable circumstances. This is why some people's best work comes after their worst experiences. Not because suffering is valuable itself, but because it generates energy that, when properly channeled, drives effort beyond what comfort would motivate. The discipline part is essential. Without it, you're just reacting emotionally. With it, you're converting reaction into deliberate development. Physical training that pushes limits. Intellectual work that builds capability. Skill development that opens options. Professional advancement that strengthens position. Each of these provides structure for processing emotional charge while simultaneously building something valuable. You're not suppressing emotion. You're transforming it, not avoiding dealing with violation. You're using it as fuel for reconstruction. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires deliberate choice to channel energy into structured effort rather than letting it diffuse into rumination. But when implemented, it converts violation from pure cost into partial investment. You still paid the cost, but you've extracted value from it through disciplined conversion of emotional charge into capability development. Betrayal reveals gaps in your assessment systems. Before the violation, you assessed this person as trustworthy enough to extend commitment to. That assessment was inaccurate. The question is, what information was available that should have adjusted your assessment but didn't? Usually, there were signals. Behaviors that in retrospect indicated this person wouldn't maintain commitments under pressure. Maybe they'd demonstrated unreliability in lower-stakes situations. Maybe they'd made commitments to others they didn't maintain. Maybe their words and actions showed subtle inconsistencies. Most people miss these signals because they want to believe people are trustworthy. They discount warning signs as exceptions or misunderstandings. They give benefit of the doubt when behavior suggests doubt is appropriate. Machiavelli was explicit about this. Observe behavior, not words. People claim many things. Their actions under pressure reveal what they actually prioritize. If there's inconsistency between words and actions, trust actions. Developing better assessment systems means paying attention to these inconsistencies. When someone claims reliability but demonstrates unreliability in small things, that's information about what to expect in larger things. When someone makes commitments but doesn't follow through, that's data about how seriously they take commitments. This doesn't mean being cynical or assuming everyone will betray you. It means being empirical, observing actual behavior, noting patterns, adjusting assessments based on demonstrated behavior rather than claimed characteristics. The person who consistently follows through on small commitments is providing evidence they'll likely maintain larger ones. The person who's inconsistent with small commitments is showing you what to expect. This is information you should use rather than discount. Most people discount it because they don't want to seem judgmental. But accurate assessment isn't judgment, it's observation. You're not deciding someone is bad. You're noting that their demonstrated behavior suggests they won't maintain commitments under certain conditions. That's valuable information. Developing these assessment systems means becoming more attentive to behavioral patterns, rather than verbal claims. More willing to adjust trust based on demonstrated trustworthiness. More comfortable with differential trust allocation. Some people earn more, some less, based on their actual behavior. This improved assessment reduces future vulnerability without requiring complete closing off. You're still forming relationships, just being more accurate about who deserves what level of trust. Most people think vulnerability is uniformly risky. They've been hurt by extending it inappropriately, so they conclude they should eliminate it entirely. This is strategic error. Vulnerability with the right people deepens valuable relationships. Vulnerability with the wrong people creates exploitation opportunities. The skill isn't eliminating vulnerability. It's being selective about where you place it. This requires accurate assessment of who's earned access to your authentic interior versus who should only see curated presentation. Machiavelli distinguished between how you appear publicly and who you actually are privately. Public presentation is strategic. You appear, however, serves your objectives. Private reality is reserved for people who've demonstrated trustworthiness. This isn't deception, it's appropriate information management. Applied to vulnerability. Some people have earned access to your genuine concerns, uncertainties, fears. They've demonstrated they'll handle that information constructively. With them, vulnerability strengthens relationships and provides valuable support. Others haven't earned that access. They might weaponize vulnerability, or simply gossip about it, or lose respect for you because they interpret vulnerability as weakness. With them, strategic presentation is appropriate. They see curated version that serves your objectives rather than authentic interior. This differential allocation of vulnerability is power. You're getting benefits of genuine connection with trustworthy people while protecting yourself from exploitation by others. You're not universally closed, that would limit valuable relationships. You're selectively open based on demonstrated trustworthiness. This requires overcoming conditioning that says authentic means being the same with everyone. That treating people differently based on their trustworthiness is somehow dishonest. But differential trust allocation based on demonstrated behavior isn't dishonest. It's appropriate calibration. The person who's proven trustworthy gets different access than the person who hasn't. This isn't unfair. It's earned through their actual behavior. They've demonstrated they'll handle vulnerability appropriately, so they get access to it. Others haven't, so they don't. Betrayal teaches this lesson expensively. You extended vulnerability to someone who weaponized it. The lesson isn't never be vulnerable. It's be selective about where you place vulnerability based on demonstrated trustworthiness. Implementing this requires assessment systems that accurately determine who's earned what level of access. It requires comfort with differential treatment based on demonstrated behavior, and it requires discipline to maintain boundaries even when instinct is to trust indiscriminately. But when implemented, it allows genuine connection with trustworthy people while protecting you from exploitation by others. Violation creates motivation that comfort never would. When everything's going smoothly, there's little urgency to strengthen position. When you've been undermined, there's significant motivation to ensure it can't happen again. This motivation can be wasted on rumination and revenge fantasies, or it can drive actual position strengthening, developing capabilities, building resources, creating options that make you less vulnerable to others' actions. Position strengthening means reducing your dependence on any single relationship, opportunity, or resource. The more dependent you are, the more vulnerable you are to having that dependency weaponized. The more options you have, the less power any single person or situation has over you. Machiavelli was explicit about this. The prince who depends on one ally is vulnerable. The prince with multiple alliances has negotiating power. Dependence is weakness. Options are strength. Applied personally, if your professional position depends entirely on one job, you're vulnerable to anyone who controls that job. If you've developed multiple valuable skills and have clear alternatives, you're less vulnerable. The job can't leverage your desperation because you have other options. Same pattern applies to relationships. If you have one important relationship and lose it, you're devastated because all your social connection was concentrated there. If you've built multiple meaningful relationships, losing one is painful but not devastating because you have others. This isn't about not valuing relationships. It's about not being so dependent on any single one that its loss destroys you. That dependence creates vulnerability that others can exploit. Betrayal often reveals these dependencies. You extended yourself to someone who turned out to be untrustworthy, and now you're vulnerable because you concentrated too much trust or dependency there. The lesson is, diversify, build multiple valuable skills, develop multiple professional options, create multiple meaningful relationships, accumulate resources that create independence. Each of these reduces vulnerability to any single point of failure. This requires deliberate effort that comfort wouldn't motivate. But violation provides that motivation. You've experienced the cost of dependency. Now you can convert that expensive lesson into position strengthening that reduces future vulnerability. Most people waste this motivation on emotional processing. You can extract it through deliberate position strengthening, building capabilities, resources, and options that make you less dependent on any single relationship or situation. That reduced dependence is power. Not because you're closed off, but because you're not desperate. You can engage with people and opportunities from strength rather than need. The final challenge is integrating these lessons without becoming bitter or cynical. Bitterness treats violation as defining experience that colors everything afterward. Integration treats it as valuable information that improves calibration without eliminating openness. This distinction matters. Bitter people remain trapped by their violation, even years later. They're constantly referencing it, using it to justify closed behavior, treating everyone as potential betrayer. The violation still controls them, just differently than it did initially. Integrated people have processed the violation, extracted lessons, adjusted their systems, and moved forward. They're more discerning but not closed, more selective but not cynical. They've incorporated lessons without letting the experience define their entire approach to relationships. Machiavelli wrote from experience of torture and exile, but his writing isn't bitter, it's analytical. He extracted principles from violation without letting it make him cynical about human nature. He understood people operate according to interests while maintaining capacity to form productive alliances. This integration requires specific mental work. You have to distinguish between the lessons, what this teaches about assessment, boundaries, selective trust, and the emotions, anger, hurt, desire for revenge. The lessons are valuable and should be retained. The emotions should be processed and released. Most people can't make this distinction. They retain both the lessons and the emotions, which means they're operating from bitterness disguised as wisdom. They think they're being strategic when they're actually being reactive to unprocessed hurt. True integration means you've extracted lessons that make you more effective while releasing the emotional charge that would make you bitter. You're more discerning about trust without being cynical, more selective about vulnerability without being closed, more careful about dependencies without being isolated. This is the optimal outcome. You've paid the cost of violation but extracted maximum value from it. Better assessment systems, improved boundaries, more accurate calibration of trust, reduced vulnerability to dependency, all without becoming bitter, closed, or cynical. Achieving this requires discipline in emotional processing. You have to actually work through the emotions rather than suppressing them or letting them calcify into bitterness. You have to deliberately extract strategic lessons rather than just replaying grievances. But when achieved, it means the violation becomes valuable experience rather than ongoing wound. You've transformed it from pure cost into partial investment. You're stronger, more calibrated, more discerning, without being damaged, bitter, or closed. That transformation is the ultimate reconstruction, emerging more capable without being diminished. Violation, betrayal, humiliation, these experiences are costly. They damage trust, create pain, reveal that people you relied on weren't reliable. This cost is real and shouldn't be minimized. But cost paid can be converted into value extracted if you approach it strategically. Every violation contains information about human behavior, about your own vulnerabilities, about how to operate more effectively going forward. Most people pay the cost without extracting this value because they're focused on the emotional dimensions. The strategic approach is different. You acknowledge the emotions, process them appropriately, then extract operational intelligence. What does this teach me about assessment? About trust allocation? About dependencies I should reduce? About boundaries I should strengthen? This extraction process transforms violation from pure cost into expensive lesson. You still paid the cost. Betrayal happened. Damage was done. But you've extracted sufficient value that the total transaction, while painful, produced net gain in capability. This requires specific discipline, emotional processing without getting trapped in victimhood, analysis without self-blame, adjustment of systems without defensive closing, building position strength without bitterness. Each of these is work that most people don't do, which is why they remain damaged by violation rather than strengthened through it. Machiavelli demonstrated this conversion in his own life. Torture and exile could have destroyed him. Instead, he used those experiences as raw material for work that influenced political thinking for centuries. He extracted maximum value from maximum cost. Your violations are probably less dramatic, but the principle holds. Convert cost into extracted value through strategic processing. Build better assessment systems. Strengthen boundaries. Reduce dependencies. Increase options. All while maintaining capacity for genuine connection with people who've earned it. This is the reconstruction protocol. Systematic conversion of violation into capability development. Not becoming cold or closed, but becoming more calibrated, more discerning, more resilient. Type this commitment. I extract value from every cost paid. If this framework provided value, engage and share. Most people stay trapped in victimhood or swing to defensive cynicism. The strategic third option, extraction and reconstruction, is available if you choose it. The ultimate revenge isn't action against those who violated you. It's becoming stronger through the violation than you would have been without it.